Howdy, my name is Case Copeland with Divergence Academy, here with Brett Harder. Tell us your role.
I'm the director of IT at Divergence, and I also am an instructor.
4 years now?
For around 4 years.
Almost
or so,
4 years?
something like that.
Okay.
Maybe a little bit more. I don't know. I'm not good at dates.
Not good with the math thing, the numbers.
With math and dates. If I had a computer, I could figure it out, but I'm not going to do it in my head.
Yeah, well, you're in the right profession. Awesome. Well, the topic that I thought would be interesting, and I know we've already chatted about it a little bit, so forgive me if I don't ever use the right words for it, but in our program designs, we have to make choices. You got to choose what to put in because programs can only be a certain number of days, classes can only be a certain number of hours per day, so you have to decide what has to go in there and what's just not going to. The other element that we have to consider is our population. Overwhelmingly, most of our students are novices. They're getting into a brand new world. So they don't know what they don't know yet. So they're very restricted to kind of what they see in the headlines, what they hear people talking about. So the topic that I find interesting is how do you balance out the new sexy content, things that people want to learn, versus the legacy content, the stuff that people just need to know. Maybe it's not the new exciting stuff, but if they want that first job, they just need to know it. So how do you go about balancing that in the classroom? And sometimes how do you temper their enthusiasm for this sexy, exciting new thing that's just not necessary for them yet?
Well, when it comes to our program, we do have there is like an education budget in terms of like there's a certain amount of hours that we have to work with the students, and they've got to absorb material in that time. So it does come down to budgeting out what we're teaching them. And there are things that sometimes the students may be interested in that is just not helpful to them in terms of a career. There are things that we have in the past thought were more important than they are now. For example, our cybersecurity program, we used to cover Server Plus and Cloud Plus. And I know that Cloud Plus was one of the topics that students were really interested in. But the truth is it just didn't really help them get a job. And also, because of the scope of what we were covering, there was a whole lot of new terminology and new topics. And just in general, it was overwhelming the education budget. Like their brains are like sponges. You pour water on, eventually, water is just falling off the sides. Well, that was kind of the case there in our previous iteration of our program, that we had those topics that were not necessary, and since then we have removed them to help narrow the focus down and to really focus on the important things. So the program now is focused entirely on security, networking, Linux, and pen testing, which are all, in my opinion, the core topics that are necessary for that program. Cloud is something that a lot of students have shown interest in until they actually realize that it's just interacting with a web browser and using an AWS or an Azure GUI, and they realize that a lot of it is memorizing how to navigate in those, and then it becomes boring to them.
Right.
So
it's not as sexy as it was at first. Sometimes you have to, I guess, undo certain misconceptions coming in. Are there other topics that, again, given our population with a lot of novices and they know what they read, they know what they hear people talking about, are there things that you think are really popular conversations out there in the ether, so they come with this enthusiasm for something that's just not crucial yet? Because our goal is help them get their first job. We got to get them to a job. So are there other topics that you think that they come in with a lot of enthusiasm for that just aren't crucial first steps?
I think that there's less that is focused on the course. So in other words, I don't think they come in with as much of a misconception or anything like that, but there are topics that students come in and want to talk about that aren't really part of the course but are still tech related, like NFTs and crypto and things like that. Personally, as an instructor, I try and keep that stuff out of the classroom just because it's not part of what we're covering, even though it's tech related. It's not something that's going to help them,
Right.
But when it comes to the actual job side of it, I think that most of the students don't really, at least our students, don't know what to expect. And so everything is kind of new to them. So I don't feel like they have as much of a misconception problem on that side. Like I mentioned earlier about cloud, there are a lot of students that thought they wanted to work in cloud until they learned a little bit about it and then realized that it's not interesting to them, where the other stuff that we cover is interesting.
So that one's an easy example. And whether we're talking about the cybersecurity program or the cloud engineering program, for any of those, are there certain contents or bodies of knowledge that, again, they're not new, they've been around for a long time, and companies just have these, whatever these components are, built into their system. So there's just old knowledge that students still have to learn, even though it's not headline material.
Yeah, there are a lot of, whenever we go through different topics, the topics usually start with history. So they start with, here's what it looked like in the past, and here's what we're moving to now and in the future.
And I'm sure the students are just doing cartwheels over excitement over the history of IT.
Sure. No, they're not. No, they're definitely not.
But it's pretty valuable to them, though, because you have to understand how you got to now, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When I go over it, from our class perspective of what we really want the students to get out of it, I let them know up front that this part is not super important. It's good to have an understanding of the past and how things worked, but it's not the sexy thing. And they don't have to, if they get bored by it, I don't want them to think that that's IT. And so I try and set them up front that, we have to learn a little bit of history, but don't feel like it's the thing that's going to, be the focus. And then we just kind of move through it. But there's no way around it. The technologies that we use these days they were developed, and a lot of them were in the 70s, and we're still using them. We may have made changes, we may have made improvements, but there's a lot of technical debt that goes into IT, and learning about the history is part of it, even if it's not something that they really have to focus on.
I remember I always proclaimed to be the chimpanzee in every room, so I want to be sure. I hear technical debt a lot. Can you kind of clarify?
Technical debt is it's stuff that we have made a decision on in the past. And when I say we, I mean the industry. Has made a decision on in the past that we're going to use this. It's going to work like this. And then in the future, we realize, maybe that wasn't the best idea. Maybe there was a better way to do things. A really easy example is that a lot of our network technologies were developed before anyone had any idea of malicious people on computers, malicious actors. And most of the old technologies have no security to them. There's no encryption. They're sent in the clear. If anyone were to capture the traffic, they would be able to see exactly what's going on. And that's part of the technical debt. That's something that we still deal with today is how do we secure, unsecure technologies that are still in use?
Because if you're an older company that's been around for a long time, you're even more likely to have some of these components, some of this technical debt.
Yeah, there are companies that still run, old operating systems that they should have retired, and they just, for one reason or another, they feel like they can't, or some decision maker has said that they can't, and or something.
Won't name drop any companies, right? No, we're not going to name drop. But that's the thing. So, kind of back to the classroom component of it, just to wrap up. How do you go about, I want to say, helping novice learners understand the value of this, even though it's not the new, sexy, exciting toy?
I try and just put it in perspective that it's something that they need to know in order to have a full picture understanding. It's not something that they need to really put a lot of focused effort on, because I don't want them to get burnt out on that and not pick up on the stuff that they're really going to use. But it is something that it's still relevant to have an understanding of it. That way you can participate in conversations. Especially interviews. It's important to show familiarity with the terminology and understanding. There are reasons why it's still important, but when I talk to students about it, I really try and make them understand that it's more about just an overall picture, and it's not about you're going to work with this.
I gotcha. That makes sense. All right, so if we watch this video like 20 years from now, is there anything that's new and exciting today that you think will be legacy boring stuff 20 years from now?
Quantum computing.
I can't even play in this conversation. I'm not smart enough to know.
I think it's not gonna work out.
Okay.
That's my prediction.
All right. I like the prediction.
Still not gonna be any business use case for it.
We'll bet a 6-pack on it. How about that?
Okay.
Oh, awesome. Appreciate it, Brett. Appreciate your wisdom as always. And for all the listeners, thank y'all. Appreciate your time.